Welcome into the Gramlich and McClain podcast, episode 285, and the first episode of our summer guest series here for 2023. We'll be releasing one episode per week with some really exciting guests that I hope the listeners are excited about, Mac, and the viewers. But honestly, we're more excited because we get to talk to some people that we know, but you don't know their full story, and you really get to know them. And I mean, you and I are just people pleasers, whatever it is. We want to talk to people and learn their stories. And so this was a really fun episode.
It's my favorite time, KG. Like I do love, obviously, sports and us diving into college football, but this element of what we do where we just get to hear other people's stories and dive into, these folks that are so successful at the top of what they do, hear how they got there, hear other interests that they have. This just truly is one of my favorite. And if you guys forget, last year we had an awesome run of guests: Kirk Herbstreit, Reese Davis, Greg McElroy, Nicole Auerbach, Katie George, all these great folks. So go check those out if you have some extra time. But we're going to be flooding you with all kinds of new guests all summer long. Yes.
And so before we tell you about our great partners at Ingles, of course, let's talk about our guest for today, Stanford Steve. Steve Coughlin, or Stanford Steve, is a SportsCenter commentator and sports betting analyst for ESPN. He's really the sports betting analyst for ESPN in a lot of respects. You can find him most frequently on the Midnight SportsCenter with Scott Van Pelt. He's probably on tonight. He also appears on the daily ESPN sports betting program, Daily Wager. I got to go on a few times with him during the women's tournament. It was really fun. And he does podcasts. He writes for ESPN.com. He does it all, Mac.
He truly does. I mean, he's a Renaissance man. And prior to working on SportsCenter, guys, he was on ESPN Radio. And this story that you'll hear right here in a couple of minutes was tremendous. I mean, hearing how he got to where he did. He played at college football at Stanford, was just a really good high school recruit. And then, things change. Things happen, and he moves on to the broadcasting world. How he got to where he is absolutely brilliant. I love this interview, this episode. We dive into a lot of things. I think you guys are going to enjoy it too. Before we get to Steve, KG, it is summertime. Our partner over at Ingles is helping us get ready for that. I'm grilling like crazy. I talk about my favorite time interviewing people. My real reason this is my favorite time is because we get a grill out on the back porch, and Ingles is the spot to do it. Whether you're a big veggie guy, the produce section, KG has raved about this, countless episodes, but also the meat that Ingles has. I mean, you're walking in there, you're grabbing stuff that you can get at a 5-star restaurant. That's the quality that Ingles holds himself to. You're going to see a bunch of different things on social media from me all summer long, so you got to check that out.
That's right. And something tells me that Steve enjoys a good steak as well.
That's right.
And enjoys hitting up the grill. So let's check out this message from Ingles before we get to Steve about why their meat department is just truly top of the top.
Did you know Ingles only sells USDA Choice and Prime cuts of meat? Maybe it's time to reward yourself. Our butchers cut all our meat fresh in the store every day. Grass-fed, organic, you name it. Not only that, we'll even cut it to order just the way you like it. And we grind meat fresh in the store multiple times a day. It's all in the bag. That's the best meat in town for the best folks in town. Ingles. Low prices. Love the savings.
Steve, welcome into the show. This is really exciting for me, and I know for Mac, but I know, so Steve and I, this is a little behind the scenes. We've been talking about some women's hoops gambling on occasion, and I know, obviously, Stanford Steve's a sports betting analyst for ESPN, and we both believe that can help grow the game. But Steve, just thanks for coming on, man. How is this time of year for you? I know you're obviously huge into college football. March Madness just ended. We've got Masters just ended. You've got baseball and so many things coming up. So what's this time of year like for you?
Yeah, it's actually it's a real quick lull, Kelly. Like Scott's going to be drained coming back from the Masters. I actually got a couple days off around the Masters, knowing how tight the credentials are down at Augusta. So it gives us a little break. I think it helps him to get time away from me. But we're ramping up here. We got NBA playoffs, we got Stanley Cup playoffs, and most of the nights you're going to see us following those games. So it is it's a May marathon. When we get to May, I know we got some April left, but I mean we got playing games now, and the playoffs are getting extended. You mentioned baseball. I try and keep my eyes on college baseball, college softball as much as possible. So it feels like it's March Madness. Yes, everybody's so invested, it feels like, because of their bracket, and it's a time to be a little selfish about your bracket and stuff like that. So for us, it's kind of not cringeworthy, but like you're just looking at May ahead of us, and it's like, oh man, we're about to be in it, that's for sure. But nobody cares about that. They just want us on the TV after the games, and we'll be there for that.
That's right. Just tell us who to pick and tell us why we're dumb for picking what we did. So that's what we need to hear. Man, listen, we're doing our summer guest list here. It's one of my favorite things that we do, just, because we get to jump in and really talk to people and hear their story and how and why they do what they do. And so we're going to be all over the place today, but I do want to go back to the football days, man, because coming out of high school, I mean, you were a dog. I mean, All-American first team, unanimous, I think, player of the year by a couple of different outlets, in the country, not just the state of Connecticut, all these different things. You go to Stanford. How did that, experience, decision to go to Stanford, how did that propel you to know where you are today?
Well, it's the problem, Mac, here is it gets older and older and harder to remember a lot.
So just make it up.
As you get older. No, my dad passed away when I was going into my junior year of high school, so I didn't have I had a brother that went to Columbia that helped me. Obviously, my mom was in the mix. But I just go back to that time, and I do think about it a lot now with NIL and stuff like that, because there was none of that then. What we had was, I think it was August 1st, coaches could finally call you. So you get all this mail and stuff, and you're like, yeah, it feels good. But it's just, quotes, motivational quotes and all that stuff. So it's like, all right, we'll see, when the time comes. And, before my senior year, I think when they could finally call, I had a job. I went to work, and my mom kept the phone. I remember coming back, and she had one of the big yellow notepads, and it was 50-some schools. I'm like, oh boy. I'm like, this is going to be a challenge, and it's really hard because you're a 17, 18-year-old kid, and these guys are selling you the world. You're going to be the guy. Come to our place. We got it all set up for you. We got so-and-so coming back at quarterback. Our defense is good. And you start talking to these guys every week, and you build these relationships. And now you're an 18-year-old kid, and you got to tell them no. That's really, really hard. And there's no book on it. It's, you're trying, and then there's stuff, schools being added. I remember Coach Spurrier started in the process real late, and I was just blown away. They're number one in the country at the time. And, I had just come back from my visit at Stanford where I'm sitting down at the meal with Tiger Woods. It was an absolute whirlwind, and I didn't even end up taking up my 5 visits. I went to North Carolina before my junior year to check out Chapel Hill, Durham, Raleigh, and Winston-Salem.
Wow!
So I had a beat on that. Carolina was right there. Getting recruited by Mac was always a treat because he's the utmost salesman, and he's not going to miss anything. But he did forget to tell me a year later after I signed at Stanford he was going to take the Texas job. So I do feel that. So I always have that on him for making my decision feel. But people ask why Stanford and all that. All you have to do is go there. For me, it was a chance to prove myself. Without my father, that I could go out and live on my own. I always wanted to go out school, watching the Pac-12. I just thought it was cool seeing the uniforms and being in that, when it was daylight and it was nighttime back home, those 3:30 games. So, but then just going there and those people, the academic staff, Verity Powell, I'll still thank her to this day. She grabbed me and said, "Don't worry about a thing." And that's what I was scared about. I was scared about the academics.
Sure.
Coming from a small town in Connecticut, I just wanted to make sure I could do it. And
that's right.
It wasn't pretty, but we ended up getting there. It might have been an extra semester, but we do have the degree. It's actually right over here.
Come on.
But meaning to hang it up. So, yes, it's there. It took 4.5, but we got there, and I couldn't be happier with the decision.
Sure, no doubt. A little victory lap. There's nothing wrong with that. Getting a little extra time.
Yeah.
Well, how did How did you go from that to this, man? We're ESPN and wanting to do, was that something that you studied? Had you wanted to do, broadcasting or anything in any way? I'm always interested to hear, kind of when was that moment for you?
Well, being a Connecticut guy, ESPN was on
right
nonstop.
Right.
I watched SportsCenter 3 times before I went to school that day. So I had everything memorized. I was the guy, running your bracket pools and stuff like that. And that carried on, to college. And I would follow everything closely. We started, the BCS was while I was in college. So, I kind of follow that. We never really were in the mix because we lost games early. But it was really cool to follow. That was my last year was Cade McNown was number 1 in the country. They went to Miami, and Edgerrin James gave him a dose that day for the cancellation game. But I was just a guy that was always in every sport, no matter what I was involved in. So ESPN was always a goal. I had no way to get in, and I remember Rod Gilmore being our MC at our football banquet. I remember going up to him like, you get this every year, but is there any chance, you can help me out? And, he gives you the great answer. Yeah, here's my card, got in contact. But, that was the late 90s, early 2000s. That was internet startup. And I tried that and fell on my face. It was bad. And I had nowhere, nothing. And I tell young guys all the time, I just did a class, a Q&A with a class. And you got to have a plan. As much as it sucks when your guys are going out partying in school and they have more things figured out, and guys might have an advantage somewhere down the line. You got to have a plan yourself, and I didn't. I still remember calling my mom. I got to come home. I don't have a dollar. I don't have a job, and it was real humbling, man. It was a rough 12 months, and I basically just started substitute teaching at a local high school, and got in touch with a local radio guy who had worked at ESPN Radio, and that was a couple years. Started doing high school games and took an entry-level part-time job at ESPN Radio as a production assistant, and just worked my way up from there. And I knew once I got that in that I was going to do something with it, whether it was Mike and Mike shifts coming in at 3 a.m, overnight shifts, being there when those guys came in at 5 a.m. No matter what it was I was going to do it. And along that line, I feel like you build relationships, but the only way for me was nobody knew me, and it was just through doing good work and getting guys prepared. And we know this, being on this side of things now, you feel it's just like going to a game. If you're not prepped for the game, you're going to feel really bad. And going on air, if you don't have a plan, you're in trouble. So it was just always trying to have that host back and fill them up with as much information, and whether it was a soundboard or an article that you wanted them to read. It was just, from the ground all the way up, and we're here today. Scott's relationship has meant the world to me. I owe him everything. When he said, it's already been 7 years. September's going to be 8, I think. And he said, when he got this SportsCenter show, I was coming with him. I had never done a second of TV. I had no idea what to think, and we made it work. People like it, and like I said, I owe him everything.
There's so much there, Steve, and I think first and foremost, Mac and I can speak as former student athletes. When you're looking for a job, the thing that people can know about you is that you do know how to work. That's the bottom line, and so it sounds like that was a big part of what got you to where you are. So you start as a production assistant, and I've learned more about this. I didn't know anything about the ESPN structure before I was hired by ESPN, but it is hard. Very hard to rise up from a production assistant to where you are now. And I know you formed that relationship with Scott Van Pelt. I also have read about forming that relationship with Ryan Russillo. So tell me more about specifically you and SVP, because you guys are a dynamic duo. It feels like you can't think of one without the other. You do the Midnight SportsCenter, which we know is one of ESPN's biggest shows. So how did you meet Scott, and how did that relationship come together?
Well, in 2007, I took over as the producer of the College Game Day radio show. And then in 2008, I started traveling with the show, and we basically were going wherever TV Game Day was, and Ryan became the host there. And being on the weekend every weekend, I spent more time with Ryan than I did with my girlfriend / wife to be at the time. And, there was a lot of, anxious moments, whether it was just being around each other too much. But on those Mondays and Tuesdays we would come back, Ryan did the show with Scott. And I would just go in there, shoot the stuff with those guys. Hey, what'd you watch this weekend? And I always prided ourselves, then I took over as the producer of the SVP and Russillo show. And from there was just we weren't in it for wow moments. We were game watchers, and we reacted to the games. Like, it was that simple. It struggled a lot of times, to find a there's always a topic or stuff like that or jumping off point. But we struggled with that because we just wanted to react to what we saw, and we were the afternoon show. So that was to some people's liking, and, it was around the digital time when you couldn't measure numbers and stuff like that. But then, I mean, we're 10 years out now, and we still get stuff all the time. So there was a lot of people listening online I don't think we accounted for. We had a live stream on there. It was when the chat started, and people could message the show. So I still get random stuff from people. Scott does too. Ryan does also. But from there, to be able to get, like, they would call on me on the radio show to, whether it was my take on the game or what I was looking forward to that weekend. And I just found a comfortableness talking to those guys, and I thought people liked that. And I think Scott did too. He respected what I saw and what I thought, and I thought that helped talk a lot and explain to people once we went to the TV side and saw another bald guy going up on the desk with him. What's this guy bringing to the table? So, it was just a lot of time. I think people find, whether it's program and stuff like that, you guys have an obvious connection, but it's hard to just piece things together.
Sure.
It needs time to marinate, and Scott and Ryan, got frustrated by that. I got frustrated by it because you see all these other people, getting these opportunities, and it's like, hey, we got a following here. You just don't see it. And it was tough to explain, but it ended up, I think, working out for all three of us because people have shown they like us, and I appreciate everybody still watching and listening.
I mean, it's amazing, brother, because it just sounds like it's, three dudes having fun, watching sports, and we're getting paid to do this? Like, what?
Yeah.
What are we doing here? So walk us through, I guess, that transition to DC and where you are now. Like, how did it come about? You said Scott told you, hey, if this happens, I'm bringing you. Well,
Yep.
I mean, what was, I guess, that period 7-8 years ago, which is crazy. What was that like?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was nervous because, like I said, he's hosted SportsCenter for 15 years. He was good to go. It was just trying to find my spots in, whether it was during a highlight and offering something, and then going on the desk for Bad Beats or wearing the World segment, and just being myself. I just that's the only way I knew how to do it, and looking at him and just knowing each other so well. Like, I know what drives him nuts. I know what he really likes. I know what bothers him. I know things that he doesn't want to do. So there's that fine line of being the other guy and trying to turn that switch. So that was the key. It was a feeling out process for sure, I remember. And then, that NBA Finals that year was when LeBron beat the Warriors. And I remember, I was in charge and still am of the guests that come on the show and being in charge. And, every game the Cavs won, I'm like, can we get LeBron? Can we get LeBron there? Finally, it was like, if he wins it, he's coming on. I'm like, okay, I'll believe that when I see it. And being in the control room, I'll never forget Scott being on the desk. And we had the camera on the chair of where our guests were coming. And sure enough, the trophy and then LeBron with like a cigar sits down. I'm like, all right. Now it feels like we got this ball rolling,
Dang.
And that was definitely. I mean, that was almost 8-10 months of the show, and it was like, all right, now we know what we are. Now we're at a place where people are going to come, post game to get the best things, and we're going to trust our host to give us the best information and ask the best questions to guests, and that's where I feel like we really found our niche and what we were, because sport, people can get highlights on their phone all the time, and we still try and do the general gist of showing highlights and offering our own piece of a highlights and maybe doing a different highlight that the traditional SportsCenter is not going to do. But we knew what we were then, and that's what I think we built upon. And we've done different things and, have to take time off when he goes and hosts the Masters. And a couple of weeks, we'll go up for a whole week for the PGA Championship, so there'll be no SportsCenter there. But, in and around that, NBA games are over. Stanley Cup now are over. We're your home after the game. So that we found ourselves as that post-game SportsCenter show for sure.
And it's so smart. And I want to get into some of the sports gambling kind of future of sports in that. But it's so smart because, for the longest time, it was, okay, the game ended, you're going to get your reaction in the morning paper. Like, that's what it was. And as the internet started to blow up, you get your reaction online. But to have a show that's going to take you from the game to, it's not just the highlight, let's react. Let's talk about what happened. Let's, have some commentary here. I think it's just genius, and you guys have done such a great job. And I want to talk about sports gambling here. And I think it's becoming less of a taboo topic. I mean, Mac and I live in the South. There are still people who will say, well, we'll never legalize sports gambling down here.
Yeah.
And, it's a slippery slope, whatever. But, and you and I have talked about this, especially for a sport like women's hoops that is so near and dear to me, it's a way to get the casual fan much more involved. So for you, Steve, as a guy who started kind of in the early 2000s when, look, people have always been gambling on sports since the scandals we had in the 1920s or whatever. But how have you seen it evolve where it's become so much more mainstream? And where do you see it going just in the overall sports landscape?
Well, I do think there's a fine line of it, Kelly. I really do. Like, I find myself, wanting to watch when a game's on, I already know, what the line is. So, like, I'm not your average viewer, but I don't need to be slapped in the face with it, with updated odds and all that stuff. But it is, like you said, it's another way to grab the casual fan. So, like I said, it's a fine line to keep the integrity of the game there. But let's face it, the majority of people watching games, especially late at night, they got money on the game, So you got to entertain those people. And I think with the live wagering, that's a whole nother level where I think is tough to explain when people are still getting into the original basis of gambling on the game. So, I think women's basketball, like I was texting you before, as the bracket's coming out, I'm like, wow, what's this going to be? Like 116, are we going to have a 50-point spread on a game? Like, sure. Why not? If you need it, that's what you need. Yeah. Right? So, and it's a way to talk like, hey, just so you know, this is a 116. We've only had, and just so you know, I was at the 16 versus 1.
The Stanford game?
Beating Stanford. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Miss Fisher gave it to Stanford that night. I was right there behind the bench, and there were a bunch of injuries for Stanford in that game that I don't want to bring up, but I will bring up because people just throw it in my face all the time. But, I was there. But hopefully we don't see that ever again. But it's a different way, and I thought, the Caitlin Clark dynamic of it, all that. Like, next year there are going to be point props on her every single game. And I just look at that idea. You have the buildup. Now we're even talks of, will the women's Final Four be in the same town as the men's Final Four? Like, that's that. Like, if you're I've always said the Final Four is my favorite based in the city. Now, I'm selfish. I want to be able to walk everywhere. Houston is not my cup of tea where I got to get in a car and drive every single place. But, you talk about that. There are cities that can do it. And I love the Final Four because you get 3 games. You get the 2 games on Saturday, and then you have the buildup of a championship, and you get teams. I was at the Final Four in '99 when UConn beat Duke, and to see so many of my friends just wing it and say, I'll figure it out later and throw a flight on my credit card. I'm coming down to see UConn playing a national title. Like, there's that window, too, where people could travel to the game. So getting back to the sports gambling, I do think there is a line where you're giving it too much, but there's definitely a space to offer that, in a pregame scenario where there's things to talk about. We got NBA playoffs starting out. There's going to be point props on every single player, and it's going to be a lot of it's going to be matchup based. That's interesting to me. I want to see, we have more guys average over 30 points in the NBA this year than any other season. How's that going to translate now that we got playoffs? The injury report, I think it's going to be a little shorter than it is during the regular season here in the playoffs. So the idea of all that factored in, I think it makes a case to bring up the gambling aspect of the game. And, the leagues have said, tabooed on it, and now we have stadiums, being sponsored by casinos and stuff like that. So I think that wall is knocked down. I just, there's a time to embrace it, but there still is the integrity of the game, and that's where I find myself sometimes, watching these baseball games and coming back from break. There's a, who's going to hit a home run or something like that. Like, I don't need all that stuff,
right?
But I get where they're coming from because they're trying to keep the viewer watching, and that's how you do that stuff.
Yeah, no, that part's interesting. I think that maybe there's some of that in the future. I agree with you, though. I don't think it needs to be thrown in the viewer's face. I think pregame, postgame is kind of the best place to do it. And overall, we are a college football podcast. So I want to ask this because we're talking about women's hoops as well. It feels like NIL has torn the Band-Aid off of a lot of things with college sports, where we're no longer saying, well, they're amateurs. Should you be betting on this game? Well, they're making a lot of money. So it almost makes people feel perhaps better about betting on college sports. How do you feel that sports gambling in general has affected college football, and how do you see the future of that in just that sport specifically?
Well, I think that's why it's the second biggest sport in our country.
Yeah.
I think how popular it is, the variety. Mac, you're sitting in the studio every Saturday. What the difference? Whether you're watching Navy run the option or you're watching, teams Wazoo out west, slinging around the yard, and the different offenses and the different amount of totals and styles. That's why I love college football. I just feel like it does give everybody a chance. You have your Cinderella stories. You have your teams come out of nowhere that people continue to deny and not believe in. And, at TCU, for instance, this year, that was just an awesome story. And people that wanted to naysay them all year, continue to bring up the Big 12. And then, you look at them go through it. Oh, they're not going to be able to go through that conference. Well, they did. And, it's just it's a continuing thing. The one thing I will say about the NIL, Kelly, is this is the line where I think now college athletes, like if you're getting paid, there's a certain, line you have to meet. And whether it's criticism, whether it's social media, you have to take an ownership of things and a responsibility. And most important, you got to have accountability. If people are going to shell out money and pay you, they want to see you go to work every day. They want to see you finish out your contract. And I think that's one thing that gets a little dicey here with the college athletes, because there are a lot of young guys, a lot of young girls, getting this money where it's like, oh, they already paid me. I'm good. No, that's not how this works. So I do think it is just like every other thing in the world. It's a process of knowing what is expected, and again, accountability is absolutely enormous. And yes, there are going to be bad stories along this line, and there's going to be money shelled out that shouldn't have been. But I think now that we're in it, you're going to have your good and your bad. But I think there's a learning curve, and I think there's time and certain instances where people will look back and learn from some things and make the best of their opportunities as they come forward to them.
Yeah, man, it's such just an evolving landscape and things changing. And that accountability piece that you bring up, it's going to be interesting to see, because if a guy's getting paid or a girl's getting paid $1 million to perform at a certain level and you don't, there's repercussions. There's going to be backlash. There's all these different things and perception. How much does that change? So, just being a sports guy, but also having played, at the college level and doing these different things. I mean, what do you think about where this sport is headed? We're headed to an expanded playoff, NFL, or NIL, all these, expansion of things. Do you like it, love it, hate it? What do you think of where we're going?
Yeah, it's hard. Nobody likes change, Mac. Let's just face it. Nobody likes it. But there comes a time where you do need it. And I do see, the expansion continuing. I look at these. I think the Big 12 is a little scared right now of what they're losing and especially where they're going to. I look at what the Big 10 did and plucking the LA schools from the Pac-12. Like, what are they? They don't even have a TV deal, And that's the stuff where it's like, all right, are we more worried about getting money right away, or do we need to get our schools more exposure? That's where I look at. So, what does that provide, or where could we go for that? ESPN has more entities and places to put your games than anybody.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the one thing I still think that sells more than anything, because when you look at those, those growing stories, UCF, 10 years ago, they're nothing. I mean, they fired a coach, a winless season, and now they're going to the Big 12. Like that's a big deal. But why? Because they were exposed. They took that opportunity when they had a great season, and they rode that thing into the ground. And look at now what they are. I mean, you go to that campus now, it's like a different world than it was 10 years ago. So there's money out there. Obviously, the expanded playoff with the new TV deal is huge. I just wonder, every team's not going to have the same opportunity or the same even chance, right?
Sure.
But you still got to provide the opportunity for the teams that don't have the sustainability as an SEC or an ACC or a Big Ten. So that's what I think is key, is still leaving the door open for these smaller schools or these conferences that aren't even made up yet. They still have to have a platform and a road into play with the big boys. So that's where I think is key, to make sure those doors remain open with so many teams changing conferences and, tiers of conferences, most importantly.
Right. Well, and that's kind of an interesting thing, too. You mentioned all these conferences. You mentioned the small schools, things of that nature. In 10 years from now, maybe 10 is the number, are you on board with these or this super conference? Do you think it's going to become mini NFL, where it's the Big Ten that yangs over to the West and the SEC that, yangs up to the Northeast?
And what happens to Stanford, Steve? You got to be worried about Stanford.
Well, that Stanford's its own conversation.
Yeah,
we got to get some people that care about sports involved at that university.
Very true.
And I understand where the priorities are. I get it. But, Mac, I could totally see, 4 conferences. I really can, because – now, with the amount of money that's coming in, and
is it a different league though? Like, is it a Division 0? Is it just a new entity? Is it just football? Like, it's going to be weird.
Yeah, it's going to be weird. I think what we're going to learn a lot about, and I've listened to a lot. I listened to an interview Bob Huggins did over the Final Four, and he was asked about Houston coming into the Big 12, and he didn't shy away. He was like, they have no idea what they're in for. And I thought he was a great person to talk about that, because look what West Virginia did, and still look at their schedule, what they have to do.
Brutal.
And I'm not talking about basketball and football. I'm talking about women's soccer. What do they go to Texas for a month and play, 6 games? Like, I just, and I get it online with schoolwork. That stuff, that started to happen when I was in school. Like, you could take classes and, you have tutors traveling with you and people involved in the university. That's not where I'm just thinking about the travel ideal. Are they going to be taken care of as much as the top tier teams? And that's where I think we're going to see they are. I think they're going to be, traveling on charter flights and being taken care of and being, getting enough rest, being a student athlete. That's the thing where I think might be getting blown out of proportion. When you talk about people are talking about the LA schools coming, to play in the Big Ten. What's a UCLA trip look like to Penn State? I think that stuff will be taken care of because of the money that is brought in. There is plenty of money to go around and make sure these people are taken care of. They're rested and they're doing their schoolwork and taking, going back to that accountability, that you have to provide them the circumstances to maintain their accountability. And I do think there's enough money out there to take care of all entities. When you look at, the moneymakers of football going all the way down, I think they'll be taken care of.
Those TV deals. I mean, that's where the money's coming from, especially for the Big Ten and the SEC. And as I'm talking here with 2 girl dads, you guys, I think, both understand the importance of maintaining women's collegiate sports. Obviously, it's something I care very strongly about as well. And I want to ask about the ACC in general, Steve, before we get to a little fun, some futures here. But the ACC is someone that you mentioned the money and the TV deal. Yeah. Well, the ACC's TV deal is nowhere near the Big Ten's or the SEC. And as someone who's not necessarily in the ACC bubble, where do you think the ACC stands right now from a football perspective, but also just in general?
Well, with the news today, they got their commissioner, so that's
true.
Good. You're not losing your commissioner. So I would think all these guys have a plan, right? And that plan has to umbrella the happy people, the people that are fine with it, and the unhappy people. And we've heard the AD from Florida State come out and do his numbers. Now, I would like to do some fact-checking on those numbers where he got those, but I give him a lot of credit because he has taken this brand, their iron, while this thing is hot. And, Florida State is a great university. And, yes, they had a great football season. But we still need to see more, okay?
Right.
And that's where I think, yes, the TV contract is crazy long. And there could be some adjustments made to it. And I just think there is a way to keep everybody happy and under that umbrella. Now, Florida State, I'm sure we're going to talk about them in a second. Plenty of work to do. It is an ongoing thing. And you talk about an umbrella of expectations that Clemson football has had. Well, let's not move that over to Tallahassee this year and see how you do there. Right. And then maybe we could start having some conversation because let's be honest, Clemson has carried this flag long enough, and now they got humbled. So now it feels like pretty open reign as much as it has, and shoot, since you've been there, Mac, right?
Yeah.
I mean, more teams are mentioned amongst Clemson than I can remember in the last decade for sure.
Yeah, since Mac started the dynasty. Let's remember, Mac started the dynasty.
Yeah. Since he was a part of it. I don't know about starting it. He was a part of it. But I do think that's a big thing. And I think when you look at the Big Ten and you look at the SEC, there's the show pony, but then there's also some really good tier 2. That's been the missing piece for the ACC because it's been Clemson or it's been Florida State, and then nobody else that can hang around. Surely you get a flash in the pan, where it's Clemson or Florida State taking a seat, or Louisville, Pittsburgh from time to time. But who can sustain and be right there to where maybe you see a surpass?
Miami.
Where what we saw Georgia do to Alabama, what we've seen LSU do time to time. So I think, KG, that'll be the biggest difference. And can Florida State and Clemson coexist as these kind of, national powers?
Yeah, that would be great for the ACC if you get a Michigan-Ohio State situation or a Georgia-Bama situation.
Right.
Okay, so let's look ahead here, Steve. And I know I'm putting you on the spot. It's April. It's early. I got these from BetMGM. We're at least going to talk a few futures here before we get you out. NCAA title odds. Georgia right now is the favorite to repeat at plus 225. We got Bama at plus 500. Ohio State plus 600, Michigan plus 1,000. I wanted to throw these teams in there too. USC, Southern Cal, plus 1,400. Clemson plus 1,800. LSU plus 1,800. And Florida State sneaks in there at plus 2,000. If you had to lean to one of these futures and maybe a value play or just a team that you think could be interesting as we get into college football season, where would you go?
One team that's not on there that we could talk about, but they're not in the ACC, so we don't want to talk about them.
We can.
No, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Penn State's a team I think that could really come up this year. I look at what they have, just waiting to see how that roster pans out. But moving forward, I think making Allard a quarterback kind of rips the Band-Aid off of them and knowing what they are capable offensively. Their run game was awesome last year. They have as much talent as anybody. I look at them as a possible surprise team. Now, the road, when you talk about national title, you have to look at the road, right? And Georgia's up there because of their schedule. They don't have anybody on there that's going to threaten them. So and that drum will be beaten plenty. Alabama, quarterback. People don't seem to mind it. I am very intrigued what happens there. And go down the list. Ohio State. That's some pretty big shoes to fill. Yeah. Michigan got their guy. SC has their guy. Clemson's got their guy. LSU got their guy and a backup for the time being. But Florida State is a team that is going to have to handle this craziness of the offseason. And every year since I've been doing this, I've called it fake momentum. Right. And what fake momentum is you get your quarterback back, you have your head coach back, and you win your bowl game. That stuff used to feel like it meant something.
Right.
But now with the portal, NIL, freshmen coming in, coaches changing as much as they have, I'm not sure it means that much anymore. Wow. But Florida State has all those things. Yeah. And when you look at it, does it matter? I think it does. when you look at Florida State and what they have cooking here, because Travis was just tremendous. I look at what he's overcome. I mean, think about him on the sidelines in that Louisville game early in the year. I just didn't know what to make of it. I mean, that was a make or break deal for that whole program, I thought.
Yeah.
Looking at where they were and knowing what the expectations were, and people say a year early. I think they got back on track this year, knowing how last year ended. But he's a guy that is as dynamic as anybody in the league. I get it. Drake May makes the wow plays, but when you take an offense as a whole, I don't see how you take North Carolina's offense over Florida State's. I really don't. And then you factor in what they've done defensively, the change of system, and just guys getting better. You know, that's one thing that we get in this pressure cooker of a season where we're analyzing week to week. You got to let these guys play together. We know how much, the hitting is not what it used to be in camp, Mac. It's not. There ain't no lining up 9-on-7 as much as there used to be, okay? So for the coach's sake, and I'm always going to back the coach. Like I said, with accountability to players, these players need to step up and take on more responsibility. So for the coach's sake, there's a feeling out process. So the out-of-conference schedules where you're throwing guys to the wolves, we're going to get FSU, LSU again.
Right.
That is, as risky as it could be, I think you learn a hell of a lot more about yourselves.
Sure.
Look at LSU coming out of that game. Yeah. I think Brian Kelly really learned a lot about what he had in that circumstance. So Florida State is that team this year. They are going to get talked to. It's going to be everybody's favorite pick because they saw Clemson take a step back this past year. They finally get over the hump of making Klubnik the guy. So Florida State is going to have to be the team that handles expectations. And, listen, you guys are very familiar with them. Online, it's been a while, but they're back. That Florida State fan base on social media is like no other. So I don't know if they all go to the games, but they sure are online ready to party.
Hey, we love it. We love it because they're listening to the podcast.
Absolutely. It is entertaining as hell. I think Florida State, when you look at every team, they are going to be the one that sticks out that has those three entities. So I look at them as having a huge target on their back, and that starts week one. I mean, the other thing is, you talk about the road with the teams to win a title. These teams, the ACC and the Pac-12, I think the last couple of years are more so than any. The opportunities you have to play against the SEC in the Big Ten, you have to win those games.
Have to. Yeah.
Because people talk about narratives and how they get created.
Yeah.
That's it right there. And Florida State helped themselves a ton winning that game last year, and now it keeps going up. So all the credit to them. They get they got in their stance and they made plays when they had to.
Yeah.
Now it's about taking it to the next level. I think Travis is the guy that could take them there.
Right.
So Florida State definitely is a team that I would lean toward looking at those odds.
Come on, man. I like that. Our Florida State listeners are going to love that. I'm going to let KG jump into the Heisman. I've got two for you. I'm interested in your take on, and Kelly has asked this to a lot of people that we've had on lately, specifically Noel, so I'm interested for a neutral guy here. Is Florida State going into this year the favorite to win the ACC?
I believe so.
Should they be? I
believe so, yeah.
Okay, so I like that. And then would you rather – or do you think it's more possible they're 4-0 or 2-2 to start this season? They have LSU and Clemson in the first 4 games.
I can't get a 3-1.
No 3-1. No 3-1. No 3-1. I'm not letting you either. You're either all in or you're all out.
I like it. Put me on the spot. More likely between 2-2 and 4-0, I would say 4-0.
Wow.
I would.
Man.
All right.
I would.
See, this is what I'm interested to see. Everything that you just said, can they handle it?
Yeah.
Can they handle all this expectation, all this hype? A team that did not beat a ranked team last year, can they handle all of this and take that next step? All of it's in place. You just mentioned with coaches, with returning players, so much experience. They're not learning anything. They're just playing.
No.
Can they take that step?
Yeah, I mean, Mac, you know this. Like, back in 99, 2000, we had just installed like the zone run scheme, right? Right. And literally we look back and we're like, oh, we were trying to run this in 97 too. It literally took that long for our guys. When
right.
you get injuries and you get guys that are starting to play each other and coaches see, oh, wow, this left guard is better with this left tackle when we're running, 43 zone as opposed to 42. It's totally different nowadays. And that's where I just think, the one thing I will say at Florida State, like they know now what they're getting into.
Absolutely.
Whereas last year, you got to go to the Superdome. You really don't know what you have. Mm-mm. You got some transfers that you're hoping the best for,
right.
But what's going to happen when you go down? You're down a touchdown in the second half. I think he knows a lot more about his team. I think you talked about it. They're not learning now. They're looking to take the next step. Yep. So what are they doing? They're working on what they're good at. Yep. And what they could go after LSU with. So, I do think the world Norvell has done. I mean, think about coming out of COVID with the way that roster was. I mean, that was as ugly. It's terrible. Yeah.
I mean, it looked like a high school team. When you go to practice and you see the body types 2 years ago, we're just like, what is this? This is not Florida State.
And then you got the guys on the roster spouting off on social media.
Oh, yeah.
Like that was just,
right.
To see him roll his sleeves up. And stay there and say, this is how we're going to do it. This is what we're going to do it. And I'm going to be the leader. That showed me a lot. That really did. So, hey, Florida State, you always want to be in the mix. You got the expectations now. We'll label you.
They're there. We're going to have fun talking about that all summer. All right, Steve, I know you are super busy. So let's finish here with some Heisman discussion. And the other thing I know about the Heisman discussion is that the favorite basically never wins. So you've got Caleb Williams. I just found these odds on Sports Illustrated. I'm not sure if we have official, there's probably different odds out there. They're all over the place. Caleb Williams right now is the favorite at plus 350. You got Drake May at plus 900. Bo Nix plus 1,100. Jordan Travis plus 1,100. Also Michael Penix in there at 1,100. Sam Hartman at plus 1,400 with Notre Dame. That's very interesting. Quinn Ewers, Brock Vandegrift, and then Klubnik comes in at plus 1,400. You can say Caleb Williams if you want. It just feels like for chatter, it's never the favorite. And he came so close last year, and the expectations are so high. So how do you feel about this whole Heisman discussion as we were talking in mid-April? So obviously it means nothing. But what do you think?
No, I just think I look at the ground and the floor that these guys have set, Kelly. Like, look how good Caleb Williams was.
Right.
Look how good Drake May was. Bo Nix, I didn't think he was capable
Me neither.
of doing what he did. And Penix was just seeing him back with Coach DeBoer was awesome to see. How many of these guys could be better than they were?
Right.
That's what's weird about this coming year. And, being a Pac-12 guy, I just look at those quarterbacks in those leagues. I just rattled off three of them. UCLA might be the best team in the Pac-12. They don't know who their quarterback's going to be.
Right.
So I look at the floor these guys have set, and Caleb is going to jump out there at the beginning of the year because their schedule's so backloaded.
Right.
So you got to be wary of that. But I'm with you, Kelly. I would never take the favorite in any race. Hartman is super interesting to me because Notre Dame has been really handcuffed at the wide receiver position. It feels like they do have some guys now. And I don't know. I just want to see Sam Hartman not in the Wake Forest offense.
I know.
I think the world of him, man. I really do. I just want to see him play like a real system where we're accustomed to seeing and being familiar with. And with Cade, I'm not sure. Like, this is the one thing I would think about for Clemson opponents. I don't think you have seen the capability of this offense. You got a new system coming in.
Yep.
Now you can't, run all your, use all your old blitzes and game tapes you used against the old system there. So Cade probably has the biggest room to grow when you look at those guys and what he's coming off of. So he's interesting for sure. The problem is what's he going to do? How much shine is Shipley going to get?
Right.
When it comes down to it with the stats, you're going to have two guys there that are worthy. Like, I thought Shipley was a good value this past year, and obviously things don't work out because of what happens at the quarterback situation. But now I think Shipley's a guy that you look at and knowing how versatile he is. And like I said, with this new system, it's I think it's the best case scenario for Clemson. Their coaching staff, their players, their fans, like, it is fresh.
Yeah.
Things I do feel like got stale being an outsider and watching Clemson.
Sure.
Plenty of things you look at, whether it was the defense. Like, I thought their defensive line last year was going to be the best unit of any unit in college football.
Yes.
And, the situation with Persee, and it didn't gel. No. And I think a lot of that stems from the struggles on the offensive side, where a lot more was asked of the defense.
Yeah, exactly.
Go back to the great Clemson teams. That defense was great because the offense was taking care of business.
Right.
When your offense isn't taking care of business, your defense has to be that much better.
It's hard,
yeah. Yeah. Those guys, come on. Those defensive guys don't like being on the field a lot. They like those 10, 12 play drives for the offense. So I think Shipley is a guy that's not on the list that I think can take his level because the versatility, the dynamic factor he has, where he could line up anywhere on the field. I just love that. I really do, and he's a guy that I think is going to have a major year this year.
Yeah, especially, you see what Riley did at TCU with that running back staff or unit and the things that he's going to do with Shipley. People are excited. They're excited about it, man. We're excited. This was an awesome episode. Dude, we really appreciate your time. I know you're all over the place, so thank you. First guest on the summer list here, man. You knocked it out of the park.
All right. I'm always here. I appreciate you guys, everything you guys do, too, so I'm listening whenever I can. Good luck with everything, and have a great summer.
Mac, this interview was truly awesome. I'm so glad we started our summer guest series with Stanford Steve. And you know him, you love him, you see him on Midnight SportsCenter, follow him on Twitter. He's all over the place. But appreciate his time, his thoughts on the future of sports gambling, but also college football, the ACC, etc. And his thoughts on Florida State and Clemson. I'm sure we will revisit those thoughts many, many times as we go throughout the summer, Mac.
That's right, KG. I'm saving all receipts from every guest that we talked to.
Hey, he had a lot of great things to say about Clemson, too.
He did. It was great. It was a lot of fun, but really appreciate him just, again, starting off our summer guest tour here with an absolute bang. And again, all summer long, guys, we're going to have some great guests for you. Cannot wait for you to see who's coming up next. But that's it from us. Another great episode of Gramlich and Mac Lane presented by our great friends over at Ingles. If you haven't already, get on YouTube. We do a lot of fun stuff over here. Subscribe over there. We really appreciate your guys' support. And, of course, over on Apple Podcasts, the OGs, rate, review, subscribe. We would greatly appreciate that. But until next time, we'll see y'all.